Welcome to Native Bidaské, Native News Online's weekly spotlight on the people making news and leading change in Indian country.
Welcome to another episode of Native Bidaské. I'm Levi Rickert, founder and editor of Native News Online. This month, actually last month, we were doing interviews with two people running for president. We have a third candidate who's joining us today, the president of the National Congress of American Indians. The conference will be held in New Orleans on starting November 12th, and the election will be that week. And so we have a very special guest. We have Chairman Mark Macarro from the Pechanga tribe out in California, and he is running for president of NCAI. Welcome, Mark and Chairman. It's good to see you. How are you doing today?
Love it. I'm doing well. May you, I'll say.
Okay, good. And tell us this, Chairman, why are you running for president of NCAI?
Okay, I've spent 25 years as a delegate to NCAI and for my tribe, and I've had an extraordinary opportunity to serve as the first vice president for the last 2 years. So over that time, some of those years have certainly been difficult, and some of those years we've had a lot to celebrate. But one thing has remained constant, and that is that power and influence for Indian country in DC is with the National Congress of American Indians. Our decision-making is based on discussion, deliberation, consensus, and a unified voice. And that process brings credibility and gravitas to the resolutions that we take to the Hill and to the administration. So with the open seat for president, I see an opportunity to build on my experience working with others, building coalitions, to build on the power and the influence of NCAI's voice. And so I have a vision for what I believe we can accomplish together at NCAI.
Well, it's a great answer. And you and I both know, Chairman, there are just a big array of problems that face Indian country. Climate change, environment, on and on. Suffering from the historical trauma from Indian boarding schools. And I remember seeing you at Sherman, but I think it was in August when Secretary Holland was here for the Road to Healing. And what do you think, even with everything that we just talked about, I just mentioned, what is the number one issue facing Indian country today as you see it?
Tribal sovereignty and the constant threat to it. So certainly all the things you named and more and beyond, and I'll touch on a handful, but the constant threat to it. Look, in the way I look at Indian country and the relative stability we've had for the last, say, 40 years or so, since since the 1970s, with landmark laws and Supreme Court precedents, we've had this relative sense of stability of where tribal sovereignty is and, our place in the bigger context of the politics of the United States and the governance of the United States and in our history. However, what we saw with the Brackeen case and the possible overturn of ICWA is that this concept of settled law is something that seems to be diminishing. It might be evaporating. And so, I think here in Indian country, we need to take stock of what we think the status quo is, and we need to be on this constant campaign of being prepared to push back, not just when a lawsuit appears in front of the Supreme Court, but at the ground level when forces are there trying to bring things up in front of the district courts and file those cases in different parts of the country. And I think as of late, we're doing collectively a much better job of tracking those things, but it's constant. Let me give you an anecdote. Being into DC for various things on behalf of my tribe, water settlements and stuff like that. I had an opportunity and real privilege looking back on it to spend time with the founder of the Native American Caucus in Congress, Dale Kildee, the late congressman from Michigan.
He's from my home state, or he was. Yeah.
Yeah, right.
Yes.
And one of the things he used to say many things to us when we would gather at a caucus event, and one of the things he would say is, look, they're going to come for your sovereignty. And when they do, they're not going to take it all at once. They're not going to come in a frontal attack and just rip it away. They're going to come and take like cake, one little slice at a time.
Mm-hmm.
And I think up until Brad Keene, he was right. And I think that's still true. They will do that. And that was a great analogy, I always thought, because it spoke to, we need constant vigilance, constant presence in Congress, in the administration. When they write laws, when rules and our guidelines are being written, those things have to be monitored, because the cheat can be in the details, right? But with Brad Keene and with this gaming case in the state of Washington, we're looking at a frontal attack that is trying to directly undermine tribal sovereignty by diminishing that, by reducing tribes to a racial group and then applying equal protection laws. And so that we see that if they're not going to give up, they're going to come back at us, and they're going to keep doing it until they succeed. And they've taken great pains and efforts to set up a system of putting judges into appellate courts and onto the Supreme Court. I once saw, in the last 8 years or so, a list of 40 judges who potentially could be in those positions in appellate courts and also on the Supreme Court. 2 of them are on there now from that list. So this strategy has long been planned over the decades, and it's starting to play out. It's not going away. And not only do we have to keep the pressure up, we have to maintain the intensity. So there's a lot happening on this front of tribal sovereignty. Now, I want to touch on another issue, though, that I think is fundamentally important. Over the last decade, 10 years, we've had 2 reauthorizations of VAWA, and the issue of missing and murdered Indigenous women and persons has come to the forefront. And there's been significant and positive changes in law and policy that are helpful to Indian country on that front. However, and especially for large land-based tribes, law enforcement in Indian country is the #1 issue. And frankly, the United States is not meeting its trust responsibility and obligations under treaties to assist us in maintaining safe and secure homelands and communities. Across our tribal communities, we see the tragic results of underfunded, under-resourced law enforcement programs. We see violent crime, drug overdoses, unsolved homicides, missing relatives.
Mm-hmm.
And so to accomplish the basic mission of law enforcement, to save lives, which is to save lives, protect people, protect property, solve crime, prevent crime, we need to have properly staffed police departments. There needs to be investigative resources. There needs to be proper equipment. In Indian country, we are faced with missing and murdered relatives. Our officers patrol 56 million acres of Indian country with only 3,000 or so officers. That is staggering. At any given time, 1 and 2 million acre reservations are being patrolled by 1 or 2 officers. BIA staffing formulas are for the most part non-existent, and that is the starting place. So we must be able to quantify and qualify the need. And so as NCAI president, one of the things I would do to address this is to call for a law enforcement summit, invite top experts to guide a realistic strategy, and because we're experiencing a crisis and we can't just sit and do nothing. We have to focus on this.
Yeah, I appreciate what you just said. Even with all the progress we've made with Deb Haaland being Secretary of the Interior, it's a wonderful thing. So you see NCAI's role as being really helping to guide members of Congress and even the administration. Is that what you're saying?
I am saying that, and but it's more.
Yes.
I'm using the analogy that NCI is the tip of the advocacy arrow. Mm-hmm. We have lots of sister orgs in the country that work on these issues. We have everything from NAFOA to NARF and NICOA, NIHB, mm-hmm. NIEA, on and on and on, NICWA, and because our issues are often complicated, they're specialized, and it's easy to be siloed off in these with the organizations. one of the things I think we've done over the last 2 years is we made significant gains internally between us and our sister organizations to continue and build on the coordination we've been doing for the last 10 and 20 years. And so moving forward, we need to focus that and marshal that so that, one, we're not spending energy duplicating the work, but when we bring it all together, we can advocate with that singular voice to make the change that we need to do, to make the advancements we need to make, and the gains that we've had over the last 40 years or so.
Yes. Now, there are 574 federally recognized tribes in the United States. And last count, I believe that only about less than half participate with NCAI. What will you do to try to bring more tribes to the table to be part of NCAI? And I know that there are several tribes out there just may not even be able to afford to get to the conferences. So, but what would you do?
Okay, that's good. Let me touch on the numbers first. So you're right on the number of tribes in the U.S. About the year 2012, 2013, there was a high point of membership based on the information I've been able to get. 270 tribes were members of NCAI. So that was peak strength over the last 13 years or so. And that number dipped below 200 over the last few years. So this is an issue to have tribes come back to the fold, to renew if they were once members, to see the relevance, to see the threats, and to bring their voice is absolutely important. In order to do that, though, and you cited tribes that may not have the financial wherewithal to do these things with NCAI and other national groups, create incentives is the answer to your question. I would champion the creation of a fund for tribes that may need travel and or registration fee assistance so that their delegate can attend the annual, the mid-year, and the Executive Council winter session in February. We have 3 major meetings a year.
Yes.
And that's a lot, to the registration fees and that are associated with that, the travel that's associated with that. So I think if we spend some energy on that, I believe we can find that solution. So I want to be a champion for that. Now, I said I would touch on this earlier, and here's where I think what we also need to do, and what I'm prepared to do, is champion a new policy that all former presidents and executive directors, and even possibly former elected executive board members, be granted lifetime memberships at NCAI so they can continue to participate without paying the huge registration fee as individuals, and will recognize their service to NCAI. As they continue to participate, I believe we need to cultivate all the experience that they gained during their time in leadership at NCAI. As you mentioned earlier, we have this thing where, people retire, they go, out to pasture, and if we're lucky, we see them at another conference some year, and it's great to see them.
Or someone's funeral, right? I mean, and that's sad. Yeah.
It is sad, and instead, all these folks, former leadership and former executive directors, they represent a brain trust. There are many hard lessons that were learned, lots of experience, and always in the passage of time, you look back on a circumstance based on what you've done and what others have done, and then you have a perspective that is unique to you. And as a group, that's a very unique group, not only for NCAI, but for all of Indian country. So we need to marshal that. We need to do what we can so that we can gain the benefit of that wisdom and apply that moving forward.
You're really right, and because you think in terms of maybe decades, but I think in the case of Indian policy, how different administrations dealt with this, presidential administrations. I think so I really appreciate what you just said. I think.
Well, just one postscript on that, because ideally, Indian country sets the agenda based on priorities for itself. But in reality, we also have to take stock, obviously, of the circumstance at the time, based on a presidential administration will set its priorities, and we can continue with the priority that fit a previous administration, and that's a square peg into a round hole. It's good luck. or we can find the flow and make the gains where we can, and so that's something that's very important to the outcomes and successful outcomes.
Mm-hmm. And you mentioned, there's been some hardships at NCAI, and I know that they've overcome. We have strong, I think there's a strong executive now, Larry Wright. Is NCAI still relevant from your perspective, Chairman? In how can it get more relevant to really deal with the real issues that impact? And you mentioned tribal sovereignty and being so, and I agree with you 100%. Actually, all three candidates basically said the same thing in terms of tribal sovereignty is the number one issue. And when Native News Online, we on like the mid-year, the presidential elections, we'll do it next year. We work with Northwestern University, survey what's important. Tribal sovereignty is always the number one answer, even among our readers. So you guys are right there. So
yeah,
is it still relevant? How has it become more relevant?
Absolutely relevant. It's the oldest and strongest tribal advocacy entity in the United States since 1944. And it's relevant because, well, I just talked about the organizations, right? The number of organizations, I think, of course, has grown in Indian country because of the need for specialized policy work, specialized research, and there needs to be a place where that all comes together, and it all gets focused. Like, you take a magnifying glass in the sun, and you can start a fire. That's what NCAI can do, and that's what NCAI needs to do. We need to keep all this work focused, and we do. One example I think is the Supreme Court project that we do jointly with NARF. NCAI does with NARF, and others, in monitoring bad case results at the lower court levels, and I mean bad for Indian country and tribal sovereignty, and try to intervene early and prevent those cases from becoming Supreme Court cases, which then ultimately may undermine tribal sovereignty down the road. So that kind of coordination, it's long-term, it's deep, sometimes it's intergenerational, and it's what we do. It's expected. Let me tell you that I've heard, anecdotes from folks in Washington, D.C. about NCAI in the last couple of years. And so I just want to acknowledge that's out there. And I will say that in NCAI's defense, there's a couple dynamics that were at play. Anytime there's transitions of key personnel in an organization, it puts a challenge on the organization. Mm-hmm. Layered on top of the pandemic, it made it doubly hard. So rolling out of this, from 2021, we're finding our footing again, and we are ready to do what needs to be done with Indian country and our priorities, and bring the fight to DC, into Congress, and into the administration, hold folks' feet to the fire, and move Indian country forward. And so NCAI is the rallying point for all the sister orgs, for our tribes, the regional groups across the country. It's our focal point. And, as people have said, or maybe they've opined on, well, there hasn't been this presence or that presence. There's always something to build on. And so challenges present opportunities. We've had the opportunity to bring Larry in. One of the things Larry brings to the table that I think really strengthens us is his 2 decades or so as a tribal chair, as a tribal mm-hmm. leader. That's a unique perspective, by the way, for NCAI to have a tribal chair in that position. And it makes us stronger, and we're already seeing the outcomes of that. And you will hear more of that, I think, at the conference itself. But NCAI is not only still relevant, but it's more relevant, more important ever because of these ongoing threats to tribal sovereignty that we have.
Mm-hmm. Yes, thank you. And tell me this, Chairman, you've been tribal chair for what, 29 years? And
I'm in my 29th year now.
You're in your 29th year, and everything I've ever heard about you out there is doing a great job. But what skill set do you bring to NCAA that you think would be very helpful at this juncture?
Oh, that's always an interesting question. I'll tell you, certainly have learned a lot. Learned a lot what not to do. But thinking serious about these things, I've been able to learn a lot of lessons about what works and what doesn't. In fact, that's one of them. That is when you go through a thing, you go through a circumstance, an episode, an issue, and you either reach an inflection point or you reach a conclusion. You need to ask questions, just so the lessons that are possibly there don't fade away into history without being of benefit. So one of those is asking what worked here, and then asking what didn't work. What could we do better? Because the other thing, one of the things I've also learned is that you think you've dealt with an issue, you think it's settled law, and okay, that's packed away, it's carved in stone, we won't ever have to deal with that again. Well, that's not what we're seeing. History does cycle through, and it's cycling faster. So
resurfaces, yes.
So, but the other thing I think is knowing when. I've learned this is what I call this skill set, is knowing when. And if I distill that into one word, it's probably timing. And here's what I'm saying: when timing is right, when you're advocating an issue and you keep, there's one roadblock after another. Sometimes you have to ask yourself, is this the right time for this? Is there a different priority to be doing this? Because when the timing is right, things flow. The process and the outcome has a feeling of something like this was meant to be. When the timing is not right, it's just bumping your head against that brick wall constantly. So, and flowing from that are knowing when to innovate versus replicate. Innovate would be like inventing a wheel to solve a problem. Sometimes I remember episodes here with my own tribe. We think, oh, this is a unique problem. We have to reinvent a wheel here. Man, let's put our noses on the chalkboard and figure this out. When we get out of our silos, we see others have had this problem. And here's a solution. So let's just replicate the solution that others have applied and tailor it to us. So being able to look at the landscape like that and differentiate is a smart way to proceed as governments. And actually, I see that here with NCAI. Here's another one: knowing when to die on a hill versus backing off and regrouping. Like I said, pushing an issue constantly is not always the solution. Yeah, you can continue fighting until I guess you retired. But sometimes when you're dying on a hill, the smarter move is to back off and recalibrate. And then, of course, in line with that is knowing when to push versus pull. Sometimes you have to pull a group along with you, and other times you have to know when to push them. And so those are some key skills. Monitoring the behavior of a group, looking at your people, your teammates, and looking at the best way forward.
Good. Thank you for that answer. And my last question, and we'll see how much more time we have. Might be able to get one more in. But what's your position of NCAI excluding state-recognized tribes from its membership? I guess there's going to be one or two resolutions that are going to deal with that issue at the conference.
Okay, so it's a proposed constitutional amendment, okay. And so that's going to occupy actually a significant amount of floor time at one of the general assemblies, and it's and it's not intended to exclude per se state recognized tribes and non-federally recognized tribes, but it would change their status to associate members. They would still be in the organization, but essentially wouldn't be voting delegates. And so to answer your question, as a matter of individual opinion, I am in favor of these proposed constitutional amendments. And here's why. The National Congress of American Indians is, in the end, a Congress. Okay? The members of the Congress are putatively sovereigns, governmental sovereigns, sovereign co-equals. They sit together as sovereign co-equals. Federally recognized tribes often are parties to treaties and other agreements with the United States through time. Federally recognized tribes have a sovereign right to self-govern a sovereign right to create laws which are binding, another sovereign right to assert actual jurisdiction among other political subdivisions. And these are actual governmental and sovereign powers that we have. State tribes and non-federally recognized tribes don't have these powers. They have a status in law that is not much different from being a social group, as a group of Indian people being together. They're a community, but they don't have these sovereign governmental powers. So in this manner, I will say that I've already found there are dozens of tribal leaders from around the country who have complained that their tribal sovereignty is diminished in this National Congress, as they have to sit in parity alongside with entities that do not share that same sovereignty, yet have the same vote on the same policy issues. And so that has become an issue of contention, and you see it manifesting with this constitutional amendment.
I mean, you have some really strong state tribes, such as Homa comes to mind. And I've been down, I have visited there, and riding around, you would really know they're not federally recognized, and for a variety of reasons, they're not. Lumbye's another one. I've been in Pembroke, North Carolina, several times. Is the true intent for those who really are not Native? Maybe they're more organizations. What's the real purpose? I guess I'm trying to ascertain of this constitutional amendment.
Well, it proposes that voting members of the Congress be federally recognized tribes as they appear on the annually published federal listing. And so,
sure.
Right. So the amendment, like I said, the amendments would not remove state and non-federally recognized tribes from Congress, from the National Congress. Rather, it would change their status to associate members until they are federally recognized. Okay. Because, one of the issues is that here's one of the big problems. There's no standardization for how a state recognizes a tribe.
Yeah, and I agree with that. That is all over the board.
Yeah. It is all over the board. In California, in the 1970s, one tribe had the state legislature issue a resolution kind of acknowledging it as a tribe, but it really, it was kind of like a cul-de-sac. Didn't go anywhere. Other states, have, in what I've been able to find out in research, they confer tribal status in exchange for political favor. And some of those tribal groups have tried to make a claim and substantiate it with OFA, the Office of Federal Acknowledgement, and they've been told, look, you don't actually have any Indian blood as a tribe. So yet the state recognized them, and they participate in SBA programs and other federal programs using tribal money and presenting tribal history of real tribes, which they have no right, entitlement, or legacy of suffering to. So, it rubs on all kinds of levels. And so this is an issue that goes beyond just one or two tribes.
Well, I know that.
And it's a difficult one. But, I will say this, and also in terms of not necessarily advocating, but, the constitutional amendment, like I said, it's not trying to divest state and non-federally recognized tribes out of the organization. They need to be in the organization. They need to be, and they can be under this if it's passed, and they get the benefit of being in the discussion and the deliberations, and they get to be in the room when it happens. That's an important thing, right? So they're not being excluded that way. So, but I think that the frustration that I've heard from, like I said, dozens of tribal leaders is that without any rigor or standardization in the process of who is a tribe and who isn't a tribe, it's frustrating. Tribal leaders feel this sense of sovereignty being diluted, and credibility of sovereignty is on the line. And so I think out of that frustration, these constitutional amendments, which came from, I think, 3 different sources, is moving forward.
Okay. Well, thank you so much. We're basically out of time. And Chairman, I wish you success in your election. We're going to cover whoever is president, but I really have enjoyed interviewing all 3. And so thank you for coming on, and look forward to seeing you down in New Orleans. So, Chi Miigwech. And do you have one last comment you want to make?
I just want to say I appreciate you doing these interviews. All three of them together should be interesting. But, the topics you take on, the work you do and post and put up there for people to learn from, that's tremendous. Keep doing what you're doing. It's
Thank
good
you, sir.
stuff for your country.
I appreciate that.
No
And
problem
to
at all.
our viewers, Chi Miigwech for tuning in to another edition of Native Bidaské. We'll be back next week with another exciting guest. November is Native American Heritage Month. We at Native News Online think it's time we celebrate year round, but I am happy that there is a month and we're going to celebrate in Chairman, happy Native American Heritage Month to you. I should have told you at the beginning of the program, but it's out there, so we're celebrating. And I think you share that same belief. We celebrate year round. So.
And back to you. Thank you.
Yes. Chi Miigwech, be safe, everybody. Come see us next week for another edition of Native Bidaské.
If you appreciate what we do here at Native News Online, we invite you to donate to support our continued work covering Indian country. You can scan this code with your smartphone or go to the link located below this video to donate today. We greatly appreciate your support. Please be sure to subscribe to our YouTube channel and follow us on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram. And be sure to scan this code or go to the link below to subscribe to our newsletter. Thank you for joining us today, and please be sure to join us again next week for another episode of Native Bidaské. Chi Miigwech.